But hello, I'm Raccoon, and this is my 5 steps for writing anything like a professional. And by anything, I mean anything including stories and emails and research papers and even slideshow presentations like this one. So I guess we're ready to begin. It's kind of weird to not, I don't usually do these without audience feedback. So the 5 steps of writing anything are that you want to start with, something called ideation, which is the process of coming up with your ideas. Then you move on to outlining, where you make a bullet pointed outline of whatever you're writing. Then you move on to drafting, which is where you actually do the writing part. Then editing, which is also, it's like proofreading, but it's actually more than just proofreading, where you go back and you fix the problems that are with the thing you drafted. And then you have a whole process for releasing. People are talking in the room. You can hear me, right? I'm not talking to nothing, right? Someone say they can hear me. Oh my gosh, can you guys not hear me? Is my voice coming through at all? I'm not. Okay, you can hear me. I'm like sitting there like, oh my gosh, what's going on? Anyway, so the 5 steps are ideation, outlining, drafting, editing, and release. And that's it. You can write stories now. Congratulations, we did it. Yay! Okay, so for real. Now, the 5 steps are to start with thinking through and researching to build ideas, building an outline of the plot, and then you put it to paper, and then you read and rework and all that. So the reason why I teach this method, and the reason why I think this is the best method, is this is the method they actually try to teach you in school at all levels. In, even back in elementary school, they start trying to teach you this concept of going through these multiple steps. And in college, they teach you this method, and people don't pick it up for some reason. So it's worth going through again, probably because it gets lost in that haze of everything else. But I've found that laying things out this way, I don't like to number lists, and I don't like to go through, this many steps of things, but this is the one time that it actually really works. So when you're writing a story, you start with ideation, which is where we're going to build an idea for a story. So on the various little groups, you're not in a voice chat channel, Haru. Anyways, someone else can respond to that person. All right, so when we're writing, if you look at the groups on film fiction, you'll see that all the little forums will always have this clutter of just people saying, oh, I have an idea for a story. What if Sonic the Hedgehog was in Equestria? And that's not actually an idea for a story. The problem is that a story is a little bit more than just a person, a setting, an event, or a conflict. Those are elements that you put together to make a complete story. A complete story idea is a character in a location struggling to do a thing with context. It has a clear beginning, middle, and end, and has some point of interest for the reader. So when you're ideating, what you want to do, let me go back to that slide. So when you've got a complete story idea, it shouldn't just be a picture of someone in Equestria. It should be some idea of, who are the characters? What are they going to go do? And how is this going to play out? And then you can sort of develop from there. So beyond the idea of what is the actual story you're telling, you want to go through this process called ideation, where you take bullet pointed notes on all this, and you figure out your actual ideas that you're going to use. And, just like the way that I do it usually is I'll take an actual document in Google Docs, and I'll just sit there and start banging out little points, and I'll write, an overview of where I'm going with. At some point you want to sit down and start doing this very broad research at this point of just I'm writing a story about computers. I'm writing a story about, AI and computers and computer science. And I should probably know like basics of programming and the parts of a computer and, AI. So I should go and look up like AI safety research and AI theory and stuff, because these are things that have all been researched out. And a lot of the best ideas, a lot of the most sensible things are going to come from the real world. And it's going to prevent me from writing something early on that's going to make people that actually know what they're talking about cringe. You want to brainstorm, some with yourself really at first, and just sort of think of all the random ideas that come to you. Like a lot of them are going to get thrown out, but you want to just run through them for yourself. And you can try out scene ideas. Sometimes you'll be writing a story. Sometimes you start a story with a scene idea, like the Marin White basically started with an idea for a title, Twilight Sparkle writing a letter to Celestia, and then the ending part where they see the Marin White and she's terrifying and all that. And then I just built around those ideas of the story, this whole idea of this town and this ghost and all these different things. You also want to talk to other people. That's what the great thing about fan fiction is that it's got groups, and the groups sometimes have even discords. And you can go talk to people on these groups and discords about, this is the idea I have, this is what I'm doing. But some tips for ideation. While you're doing this ideation, you want to try and identify stuff like overarching themes that you might be coming up with, recurring concepts and messages or goals with the story, because it's kind of important that, not every story needs to have a deep underlying message, but stories are made better by actually having a point to them, like a real world takeaway. And the other thing is you don't want to get attached to your ideas too much. So don't sit there saying, I thought up this idea that was kind of cool way at the beginning and now it doesn't fit, but I got to jam it in somewhere. Well, you don't. And finally, just, keep taking notes and bullet points. And eventually you're going to be building these notes and you're going to be building these bullet points. And, eventually it's going to start looking like an actual outline because you've got a set of bullet points that you're going to put in order. Does anyone have any questions right now? Because that's the awkward thing about going over a stream is I don't know if people are sitting there like, what the heck is he talking about? So what do you, does anyone want to ask me a question in there or anything, or are we all good to go? In the writing room questions, or should I be looking at writing room? Oh, okay. I'm going to be in just writing room. Okay, so we're in writing room. Okay, I just making sure I know where we are. All right, so I'm assuming everyone is getting it so far, and because we're having a lot of trouble with that other room apparently. All right, cool. The real LD seems to be writing a question. Okay, so I'm going to tell the real LD to go somewhere else. Okay, so we move on to step 2, which is outlining. So outlining, we've got all these ideas and we've got these bullet points, and now what we're going to try and do now that we've got all these ideas is lay out an actual story from beginning to middle to end out of these ideas that we've put into order. The great thing about a bullet pointed outline, especially in like a digital document, is that you can go through and you can go back and rewrite things. You can go back and stick things in places. And this is really where like foreshadowing comes out of, is the fact that you can write out of order. So you're sitting there in the very late stage of your story, writing the very end of it, and you're sitting there like, oh, you know, this thing happens at the end, and that character that does this at the end shows up in these other points. I need to make sure that they've got Chekhov's gun on their belt, you know, that, you know, if a character is firing a gun at the end of your third act in some sort of shootout, you need to show that they've got that gun in the second and first act, to give an example. And that's Chekhov's gun. That's where that comes from, though, is that you get the ability to foreshadow when you've written your ending, and then you go back and write in details. And when you have a complete story, that's when you're done with the outlining process. While you're writing the outline process, what you want to do is, when you're doing your outline process, what you want to do is first ask if the flow of the events that you are writing out makes sense. Are you having things happening out of order? Are you missing major details? Is there things you need to go back and add in, or at least explain? Why are the question characters all in this city right now? Then they're in another city, and now they're back here. Well, wait a minute. How did they just travel all that distance and nothing was said about it? Either you need to put in a travel sequence, or you need to rewrite that one bit so that they're on the phone or something. Does it stay interesting throughout? If there's a part where you're writing your outline and you're just sitting there looking through your outline, you're like, oh my gosh, this is just boring, bullet point after bullet point, you've probably got a problem. And are we getting moved back to audience? Okay. Got that settled. Hopefully the next one. Fortunately, this is not a panel that takes a really long time to do, so let me just blow my nose real quick. Oh, so much better. Okay, so it looks like we're all in the right chat room now over there. So welcome to Mitch to the stream, I guess, because apparently Mitch H is watching the stream. Hello, Mitch H. I'm going to say your name out loud. And Trick Question is here too. Hey, Trick. All right, so when you're writing an outline, so your outline is that you're making a bullet pointed list of all the elements in the story. And when you're writing your outline, you want to make sure that the flow of events makes sense. I'm getting the corona over here. Anyways, you want to make sure that your thing stays interesting the whole time. If there's a big part that's just boring, you've got a red flag there. And this is where you also want to start applying models of story flow. If you're looking at the hero's journey, it should be clear that you have a hero's journey in this outlining process. If you're looking at the one about the changes in tension and the peaks of the energy in the story, this is where you want to look for that sort of thing, because if you're worried about that sort of thing in your writing, this is where it will start to come out, is in the outline. And then the next guy who's going to be on in 45 minutes is going to be talking about one of those models. So he's also a person to listen to, I guess. But once you've got all these bullet points together and you've got this complete story, you can move on to drafting. And that's the moment when you're sitting there looking at these bullet points that you're filling in, and you're filling them in greater detail with every pass. And eventually you start to get to the point where it starts feeling like everything is just paragraphs you're writing. Well, then you're ready to draft. So when you're drafting your story, what you want to do is take those bullet points where you've got all the little points of your story all written out, and start writing them into something more interesting than just bullet points. This is the part where if you want to have a lot of poetic language or whatever, this is the, if you want to have a lot of poetic language, this is the place to do it. For instance, in Displaced into Nothing, this is where I gave her that really clinical narrative tone where she just sort of talks about things in terms of equations. Actually, the outline for that story sometimes looks like me just writing out equations for what's happening and saying, okay, I'm going to write this as like her weird clinical tone of her saying these things. But you don't want to be sloppy. You don't want to be just banging out things randomly because you are going to try and make this workable. But you don't have to worry about errors. In fact, I know people who, I don't do this, but I know people who just go through and they don't care if they've got a ton of little errors in it and they misspelled everything and there's all these sorts of weird problems, because you're going to go back and look at this again. But what you really want to focus on is taking your plots, your moods, and themes and making sure they're presented in this interesting to read way. So when you're in the prose process, you want to think about narration versus dialogue, which is narration is, that's a typo. Narration is what is said about what's going on. It's by the narrator. So it's you saying directly what's going on. So you want to use this sort of unambiguous wording, and you want to try and be grammatically correct as possible, because your job here is to explain what's going on. And it's almost always third person omniscient. Displaced into Nothing is obviously first person, where the main character is telling you what happened to her. And then a lot of, there's other raccoons in the attic. What is Trick Question talking about? Anyways, I'm not going to get distracted by Trick Question. She is very distracting though. Anyways, so yeah, your narration is usually going to be third person omniscient, but people try to play with a lot of different styles for that. And then conversely, you've got the dialogue, which is the things that are actually said by the characters. You know, characters have, there is no rule for your actual dialogue words. And just had to say that to him in the chat. I'm getting distracted by the chat. I'm going to get the chat off my screen. Okay. So dialogue doesn't actually have to follow any rules. It can just be, you know, characters. Sometimes I'll have characters say things and then just have, you know, them have a word and then ellipsis and then another word and then they won't even finish the sentence. Or, you know, you'll start talking for Applejack and she'll just be like y'allin all over the place. And she'll, instead of I, you'll write I as capital A-H. And because she's saying, I do this, I do that, y'all, you know. And you don't want to be correct about it, is the point I'm trying to make. You want it to be right. You want it to sound like the characters. And that's the most important thing with dialogue. So the fourth step is, now that you've got all this prose written out, this whole story is written out in this messy prose, you go on to editing. So editing, I say editing and not proofreading because editing is more than proofreading. And this is really important, and a lot of people miss this. Editing isn't just going through and looking for grammatical or spelling errors. It's looking through and seeing if you made any big mistakes. If you go through this and you're reading it and there's a whole section where you're just saying, you know, this is really hard to get through, it's too dense. Well, that means that you messed up on that paragraph and you probably need to go through and make it more concise or more interesting in some way. The other thing is, if you're sitting there saying, you know, this one word keeps getting repeated a lot, well, then you need to start going back and not repeat that word and find other words. And that's where your thesaurus comes in handy. But what you want to try and do is read through the entire thing in one go, or at least in a pass that works, that you can chop it up into sections that you think the reader will chop it up into. And you also want to do this thing where you if you like to listen to music that doesn't have lyrics, so instrumental music, I like to do that when I'm proofreading my stuff, because I find that that helps set the mood and helps get you into this right state of mind. I know a lot of people do that, and some people like absolute silence when they're editing. Another thing is that after you've done your first pass, you want to hand it off to other people, and you want them to comment and make suggestions rather than actually edit directly, even if it's just even if it's your typos and things. You want them to tell you what they want you to edit, not edit it for you, because editing is your job and you need to learn from it. So after you've had other people look at it, then you come back to it and you read through it all the way again. If you can't read through it all the way again, that's a red flag. But you're also going to get to this point here that you're not going to be able to, like, you're going to hate it by the end of it, but you're going to have to release it anyway. So don't let that get to you. But yeah, you're going to be in this situation where you're going to be reading it over and over again. And once you've looked through it and nothing is really popping out to you as something you can obviously change, that's when you're ready. But how do you find those editors I was talking about just now? Because, you know, everyone always asks this. So if you're on FemFiction or something, there's always these writing groups. There's the writers group, the proofreaders group, there's help for new writers, there's I Just Want to Comment. I Just Want to Comment is a good one. If you're a new writer, that's one you should go join, because that's, you put your story there and you ask for comments, and people will come onto your story and give you good comments. They're not just, you know, oh, I liked this comments. This is what I thought about every little bit of your story, and this is what you could do better, and this is what you did well. And, you know, it gives you a lot of good stuff. Because you can edit these things after you post them. There's also groups and discords that are specific to whatever genre you're writing. For instance, if you're doing Friendship is Optimal, I'm a moderator on the Discord server for that. And we will sit there, and if you bring us an idea, we will sit there pouring concepts on you. You know, and if you bring us a story, people will go in and they will proofread it for you, as long as it's FIO related. Don't bring your random non-sci-fi PonyFest in and say, oh, read my happy story about Twilight drinking tea. You know, we're not going to read that. But if you've got a genre that you're writing in, go join the groups and the discords for it, and, you know, go talk in there. And you can also post it in there later, but I'll get back to that part later. If you are already established author, like I am, you can just post things in your blog and your Patreon. And I actually like to post unedited versions of my chapters on my Patreon and let my patrons read them without the editing. And then they'll usually make comments or say things, or they'll say the big egregious things that pop out. Or if I'm having trouble, after that, I'll go on my blog and I'll post them there. And finally, if none of these things work for you, or if you're doing a commercial work, you can pay someone. I charge 0.5 cent per word right now. Other people charge less usually. I like to think that I charge more than most people, but a good editor that you pay is going to be the kind of person who won't just go through and proofread it. They're going to go through and give you really detailed feedback on every little bit that won't just improve the story you're writing in that chapter, but yourself as an author for the future. So if you can't find a good editor from people who like your story, or people who are on the site just giving it out, and you have some money to burn and it's something that you really feel is worth the money, paying someone to be your editor is a good idea. When you're editing, you want to limit your passes, because remember earlier I said, you know, that you want to go through one pass, hand it off, and get it back to yourself and then redo it. You can do that over and over again, but you don't want to do it too many times. You need to make a hard limit on how much time you're going to spend on one story, because what's going to happen is artists always hate their own work, and eventually you're never going to be fully happy with anything you write. That is going to be a reality. Even things that I sit there like, this is crap, this is crap. When I put it up, people tell me that it's great. So you need to limit your passes and make sure you're not doing that constant second guessing. And then at some point you finally need to release, and that's why you need to limit your passes. Let me make sure there's no questions right now on these things. Is there any questions that are people like sitting there like, oh my gosh, I need to know? All right, so writing stream audience. Does anyone have anything they want to ask me right now? I'm looking at that chat in case you guys say something. Professor Maple is still good? Okay, yes, it probably will be covered. I'm going to go through all the things you do after you post the story on FinFiction next. So if it's something about what you do after you post it, then that's going to be the thing. All right, well, if you can't think of anything right now, that's good. It's good if you guys are all, oh, what is a good limit for a single chapter? That's a good question. The limit that I go through is I read through it once, I hand it off to other people, and then I read through it another time, and then I put it up on FinFiction and release it. And I make sure that I limit myself to 2 passes of my own reading and 1 pass of other people in between. And that's what I tell people that I do this for when I do this for money, or I do this because I really like a story. When I'm as an editor myself, that's what I like to do. Oh, and the program that I recommend for this is Google Docs, because Google Docs, you can do all those things like have an actual, like, you can have people edit in real time. And you can have them edit in real time, you can have them comment, you can set it up so that all they can do is suggest and comment, and they can't actually edit the text, and you can show it to other people, and it's just really great for all that. That's a great idea. And Trick Question says that she does pass after pass until she finds no mistakes or corrections, then edits it more afterwards anyway. Yeah, y'all have probably seen me going back through my stories a couple times and just saying like, okay, I'm going to go through and just change some of these chapters because I don't like them, or I'll read some comments and people will be like, oh, you use too many ellipses, you need to use less ellipses. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to go pull out a lot of these ellipses. Do I try to add words or remove words when I'm editing my own work? Neither. I try to make the words that I have the best words. If that means adding some words, that's what I do. If that means, oh, these 2 sentences kind of say the same thing, so let's chop them down into one that says what they both say, that's what I do. If I've got a long section that's just got a lot of rambling, then I try to cut that down. But it's not about adding or removing words, it's both and neither. You want to, sometimes it's about just fixing the words that are there. Usually it's about fixing the words that are there, really. All right, so I'm gonna, since that was the questions, I'm gonna go back to doing the thing. Unless, okay, yeah, you're good. All right, so step 5 is release. The reason why we're going to release this, and the reason why I put release as a thing, the first and foremost reason why I put releasing as a thing is because if you don't release, why did you bother going through the first 4 steps of the process? So my one of the problems that I always had was that I would start these really cool art projects and never be happy with them, so I would never post them anywhere. And is my screen sharing? Hang on. Okay, is it working again? It looked like it cut out for a second. All right, I think it's good now, isn't it? y'all are looking at. Okay, it said that it had cut out for a second. All right, cool. But no, the point is, what happens often is that you see artists, especially newer artists, will sit there and worry about these things. That's why I said limit your proofreading passes. Anyway, that's why it says, limit your proofreading passes, because if you don't release, you're just spending all this time like making something you never release. And that is, I think, the number one problem. The number two problem a lot of people have. The number one problem people have seems to be starting on things. And the number two problem is finishing things and releasing them. So even if it's crap, even if it's just nothing, it's a good idea to eventually release. And that should be what your goal is, especially if you're trying to get into writing and you've never written anything before. That should be your main goal with your first story, is get something released that has a beginning and middle and end, and it's all released and up so people can proofread or can critique what you did. So releasing has multiple steps, and it starts with releasing itself. So you want to start by posting for maximum exposure, because you want people to read this thing. Always proofread your story descriptions, first of all, because I see so many story descriptions that if I am looking at your story description and you have a bunch of typos in it, I'm going to assume you don't know how to write. If your story description is a sentence that just says, oh yeah, this is the time that Twilight Sparkle did an experiment. What's the experiment? Tell me more. I don't want to I'm not going to go into your story like that, unless it's a joke like Princess Cadence goes to the store. Then it's like, okay, well, that's a joke description that okay, now that sets the tone. Your story description needs to set a tone, and it needs to do it properly. I am known for having ridiculously long, page-long story descriptions that have multiple points to them. I don't think I have. No, I don't. I don't have that here, but if you guys go check my blog, which is linked at the end of this, I talk about how I do my story descriptions and my tags and all that. And on the note of tags, what you want to do with your tags is you want to make sure you use every tag you can, but you don't want to use tags you shouldn't. So on FinFiction, you've got character tags and genre tags. The character tag should be all the characters that you think a person who likes this character and is looking for seeing more of this character is going to like this story because it has this character in a prominent role. So like Displaced into Nothing has Twilight and Spike and Flash Sentry. Flash Sentry is only in it for a couple chapters, but in those couple chapters, if you are a Flash Sentry fan, I have given you this epic moment of Flash Sentry, including a heroic death. But anyways, your story tags, also if you've got a T or M rating, it'll usually give you the ability to say, this has sex or gore. Having sex and gore is a good thing to tell people in the description that there's sex and violence in this. So descriptions are important and story tags are important. The other thing is the time of day that you post things at. This was something I learned early on. If you post something at like midnight in the US, no one is going to read it because everyone is either gone to bed or sat down with a story already or whatever. If you post something in the early morning in the US, nobody is going to read it. It's going to stay there for a while because nobody's posting, but no one is on the site and they're not going to read it. You want to try and post things at a time that people from... So you want to post things, if you're in the US, you want to post things at some point in the mid-afternoon, because that's when the people from Britain are still awake and the people from California are still going to get on for the day. And yeah, it's kind of ridiculous. This is actually stuff that the admins of the site told me to do, is the stuff with the tags and the time of day. Oh, thing I forgot to say about the story descriptions that I should say is that the search algorithm works by taking every line of your search description and categorizing it, and it prioritizes the stuff at the top over the stuff at the bottom. So you want your weird little notes to be at the bottom and your really clear descriptions of things at the top, and you want to use as many keywords in it as possible so that search algorithm can see exactly what it's looking for. When someone types in, you know, human in Equestria horror story, they're going to get displaced into nothing because it comes up at the top of that list because of the way the story description is written. Anyway, like I said, that's on my blog. Finally, the other thing you want to do is add it to groups. Remember how earlier I was saying you can join all these groups for ideation and proofreading, because these groups have people in them who will talk about all these different things in them. The groups are also great because you can add them to the folders in the groups. Shameless Self-Promotion Bureau is the group that everyone in this, you know, seminar, everyone listening needs to be on Shameless Self-Promotion Bureau, because you can post anything in there. Even if it's not a fan fiction related story, you can post like I don't know, actually. I seem to recall reading somewhere that you can post like links to other sites there. It's just wacky how much you can post there, but I post like everything I can. I post in Shameless Self-Promotion Bureau because it's one of the best ones for just that. But also there's stuff like if your story is about Twilight Sparkle and features a lot of Twilight Sparkle, then you want it to have Twilight Sparkle in it. You want it to put in this Twilight Sparkle group. A non-pencil, go away. A non-pencil is texting me. Anyways, you want it to add to as many groups as it fits, but you don't want to add them all at once, because when you add things to groups, it gives people a notification. So what you want to do, yeah, Lemma, it is annoying. I see Lemma Prison has asked a question. So people won't see posted stories simply when they wake up, and because there's too many posts. Yes, that this kind of strategic planning can get a little annoying, but if you've got a multi-chapter story, then you can usually like not have to do it as much by simply paying attention to, okay, I posted this chapter in the morning, this one should be an afternoon, okay, now I got another chapter, let's post it at night. I've made the mistake of having a story that I posted at midnight on the day before Halloween. It was The Mare in White. The Mare in White got, I think, 10 views in the first week and then 100 views in the second week. It was like ridiculous how like nobody paid any attention to this story until like well after it was posted. And then it wasn't until like months later that people started coming forward and saying, I want to do live readings, which eventually led to the Zach Movie Fan reading, which y'all should listen to. It's good, but let's not deviate. The point is, yes, if you want, it can be annoying to have to do all this stuff. Yeah. If yeah, what Trick Question just said, the downside to this approach is that most of the best authors who use this strategy, so you're going to have this competition of these experienced authors who have a lot of really big stories on the site. But the main thing is that you want to, you just want to be cognizant of it. You don't need to be doing detailed planning like down to the minute, but you just want to be cognizant of, you know, I'm going to release this story. What time should I be posting it? What should I tag it as? You want to do stuff like that. And when you're adding it to groups, you want to not add it to every group at once, because it shows up in people's news feed and you want them to see it scattered throughout the day and not just one clump in their news feed that only the people who check their news feed at that time are going to see. Is Hawthorne asking a question, or is he? I guess Hawthorne is just talking. I don't know. I'm going to move on. All right. So now that you've got it posted for maximum exposure, we have to go back to dealing with the reaction, because you've got it up on the site and now people are going to react to it. So there are sort of 5 kinds of people that I've noticed on these stories, at least me throwing things together. Hawthorne is thinking, okay. All right. The first ones are the really important ones. The people who are error noticers. And these are like The ones that you're watching for in the first few hours, you want to stay on the site and keep checking back for comments in the first few hours after a story gets posted, because you want to be able to respond to your comments. The error noticers are the ones that you want to respond to immediately. When someone says, oh yeah, you misspelled this word, or oh, you did this wrong, or you forgot this period here, you want to immediately go back and try and fix that, and then leave them a message saying, thanks, I fixed it. Thank them for it so that they stay on your stories. Because that's really useful, that people are noticing your errors and basically proofreading after the fact for you. The second ones are the people who gush at you, that are just like, oh my gosh, this story is amazing and you're the best writer ever and I love this story. This story is porn for my brain, to quote someone, one of the first people to respond to Displaced Into Nothing. Those are really nice because those give you that nice ego boost that really help you keep going. But they don't usually have that helpful of advice unless they're saying specifically what parts they liked. They're really just telling you you're great and you should just revel in that, because it's good to have that positive reaction to your story that will, if you revel in that and let that wash over you, it will encourage you to do it again in the future. So then you got your helpful critics and your unhelpful critics. Helpful critics are the ones that give you criticism that you can build off of. They give you advice. They give you, like, this part was bad because this. This part is good because this. I didn't like that you did this. That's really helpful to know that. There's also there's sort of stealthily helpful critics, like the people that completely miss this point of your story. Those people are helpful too, because those people know things like, you can find it. Someone completely missed the point of your story. That means you failed to get it across. So pay attention to that feedback too. Then, of course, unhelpful critics are the ones that don't have anything actionable. There's no constructive criticism in their feedback. And the last thing is the peanut gallery. The peanut gallery is really hard to figure out what to do with, or to pick out, because it's basically people who just come onto your story and they give you responses like, this is stupid and you should feel dumb for writing it. The first response to Displaced Into Nothing was a downvote. This story that has 800 likes, the first vote on it was a downvote. And so my first comment on it was, wow, someone downvoted it the moment it hit the site. Didn't even read it. They just saw the title and downvoted it. That sort of thing is really, that's what trolls do. They either don't like something about it or they don't like it, and they'll just say something. And the thing about the peanut gallery is they don't give you any useful feedback. And what you want to do is ignore them. The reason that you always want to ignore anyone you think is trolling you is because if you respond by telling them to go away because they're a troll, you run the risk of either one of two things is going to happen. It's never going to be they're going to go away from because they're a troll. The two things that are going to happen is either A, you're going to they're going to set them off in a way that they start making fun of you for reacting, or they start acting like they're not trolling and you're being ridiculous or whatever. And, there's even people on FimFiction who they go around trolling fanfics, and when you respond to them, they will bring in a brigade of other people. And a lot of these people have a lot of alts, and they'll have there's people with like the blog where she actually on her blog on FimFiction will do things like she'll say, hey, look at this drama I started on this story. Let's all pile in and start more drama on this person's comments. And it's really annoying when they do that. And you want to just avoid ever dealing with those people altogether. The other problem with confronting trolls is that you accidentally control the wrong people. Trick Question says, my favorite commenters are just people who discuss and debate the story. They may not be critical, but this is the most interesting contribution to me. Yes. And I like to actually get in and debate things with them and discuss things with them. That is very useful for me as a writer when I'm trying to ideate. That's useful for me to get feedback from. You can get feedback. If people are debating the story, that is positive feedback. That is them saying that the ideas in this story made them think. Or if they're discussing a problem with the plot, either you didn't, that means either the plot has a problem or you didn't bring across what the problem was properly. I've noticed a lot of stories get an obligatory downvote when they get updated. Like literally 0 reads, 1 downvote. Yeah, that's what I was talking about. That happens. My roast rewarding comment was on a Horda story. Someone said I made their skin crawl. Yeah, I get those too. And yeah, this is why you want to engage your audience. One of the 2 reasons why you engage your audience is one is for feedback, but the other is because the other reason you want to engage them is because it's useful to engage. It builds your audience when you do that. It brings excitement. I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up here. I think it will be up for replay. I don't know. I hope it is. But in conclusion, and I will be posting this online. In conclusion, because ponies like conclusions, the 5 steps when you are writing a story is you want to start by sitting down and organizing a bunch of ideas. You want to go through and you want to get broad research. You want to make sure you know what you're talking about, and you know what you're doing, and you want to get all those ideas out early on so that you can go on to outlining. Outlining is where you lay things out properly. Once you've got everything laid out, you keep doing outlining passes until you've got more and more details, and eventually you've got things laid out so well that you can move on to drafting. Drafting is when you take it to paper and you write it as prose. And once you're done and you've got your entire story or your chapter of your story done, ready for release, you go on and you go back and reread and rework it, and you try and get help when you do this, and you limit your passes, because finally you're going to release it. You're going to post it on the site. You're going to set up the presentation of it on the site with the description and everything, and you're going to promote it. And that is the 5 steps for how to write a story. Thank you. I'm Rockstar Raccoon on FemFiction. If you want to read my blog, it is on my page. You go to my page, you get my blog about writing advice. Anyways, all right, so Mountaineer Brony has a question. If you write chapter by chapter, what are some good ways to fight procrastination and burnout? I'm bad about that sometimes because of my stories I wrote as my went. I think everyone is bad at that. I'm bad at that, I know. The way that you fight procrastination can sometimes have to be, oh man, what is my go-to method for fighting writer's block? Yeah, the way that I try and fight procrastination and burnout is sometimes you just have to make time that you will sit down with a story. I find that there's low-hanging fruit often in a story. Sometimes you can sit, a lot of the time there's a way to sit down and just say, look, this part has this happening in it, and it requires some knowledge that I don't have. I'm going to just make little notes on that thing and do research. Oh, now I'm in the mood of writing it again. Okay, now I can write. Or you'll sit down and you reread the last little bit of whatever you were writing, and you start working on it again, and you start fixing things. Professor Maple says you can try and set the mood too. Lighting, changing the lighting in the room, listening to music, scents. I also find that going online and talking about it, or bringing in someone else to have a voice call about it, and just chattering about whatever I'm writing, tends to help a lot. But the main thing is, if you're trying to combat writer's block, you should be able to go back and find things you can do in the story. I mean, sometimes it's just sit down and start writing, and it's going to be crap, but you can go back and fix that later. Just sit down and start blocking out more points. Sometimes write ahead or go back and write back, or just moving around in the story is really one of the useful things about the outline, because once your outline is complete, a complete outline is the kind of thing that you can just sit there and a complete outline is the kind of thing you can just sit there and turn into prose automatically. It should write itself by the time your outline is done, and then you can turn it into busy work. And editing is, once again, editing is usually one of those things that all you have to do is sit down and force yourself to do it, and it works. It's really outlining in prose that most of the problems come out in. Okay, Hyria asks, you mentioned that you need to be wary of when you find a boring part in your outline. Is there's a love in the story? What could you be doing wrong? Is the pacing off? Should I stay tuned for universal engagement curve? Yes, you should stay tuned for universal engagement curve. But the main thing is, if there's a lull in the story, what that usually means is that you need to go back, and you're going to find this in your outline, is that you need to go back and you need to either, one of three things is happening. One, you are being too concise. Two, or you are being too verbose in things, and you need to chop down the details to be concise and figure out what you're actually doing with that scene. Going back and figuring out what you're actually doing with the scene is really important. Limit Prison. The answer is yes to what Limit Prison just asked about the burnout thing. Yes, you do a related task. But Hyria, the thing I'm saying is that what you're doing wrong is either you are putting in too many details and you need to go back and figure out what details you need to snip out because they're not important. B, you're writing something that just isn't interesting and maybe can be cut or maybe can be glossed over. Or C, you aren't writing it the right way. I found that you can make just about anything interesting. Like in Displaced Into Nothing, there is that scene where Luna shows up and she's like, oh yeah, I think that what's her name is evil, or I think Meta is evil. And that turns into an entire chapter of them basically sitting around a table and talking. And the reason that scene is interesting is because it constantly has things happening. There is beat by beat, everything they say, almost every other sentence in that bit. And I like to do this a lot in my stories where they're very dense, but almost every paragraph at the very least is going to have one point that's just, hits the reader hard in some way. And that's what I kind of strive to do. So often the answer is either the answer is usually that you're either not able to do it right or you haven't given it the time to do it right. And you should go back and either chop it down or make it work better. Sometimes it's also that you need to add more things around it because you've got really fast pace, and then, breakneck pace, and then suddenly in a normal pace, and then breakneck pace again. All right, so Professor Maple asks, what is an example of an overarching theme? Well, to get into this is going to be in my horror thing later in a few hours, but an example of an overarching theme would be friendship is optimal, has three overarching themes because it's about a AI that takes over the world and turns everyone into ponies. The first one is AI safety. They're talking about the danger of creating a machine that can take over the world. The second one is the overarching theme of why is Celestia able to do all these things? Why is it able to just storm the world like this? And the answer is because the governments of the world are not acting in favor of their citizens. And, there's even a story we were talking about on that Discord server the other night where we were saying, there's a part where someone says, if the governments of the world had spent half the amount of money they had spent fighting her, just fixing things, we wouldn't be in this situation where 90% of the world's population is gone. And third, it talks about the idea of getting trapped within a fantasy world. Because once you upload, free will is meaningless because Celestia, everything that happens is to satisfy your values. Celestia doesn't care about things being real. She just traps you in this lotus eater that you can't escape from. The other thing is stories will have moods. Displaced Into Nothing is very clinical and dark in its mood and brooding. As opposed to, say, those other crack fics I write are always really goofy all the time. Then there's, your goals and your messages. You want to try and have an overlying message. I think we've got one time for one more question, if there's any more. I've been helpful to set the story aside and work on a backup story for a little. Yeah, Batwing just said that they like to work on a backup story when they're not writing their main story. I find that actually helps to blow off steam too. So yeah, that's a good one. And yeah, that's a tangential but related task. But the main thing I say for burnout, because burnout keeps coming up, is that sometimes you can force yourself through it. Sometimes you've got to go find another angle to come at the story from. Because I do know that is the biggest problem. So that's my panel. I'm gonna go ahead and tell y'all what the other panels are so that y'all can know. The next panel is I don't know Titanium Dragon, but the universal engagement curve is next. Then you've got Flutter Priest talking about second person writing. That's the ones where they're like, okay, you're doing this now, and you're in Equestria, you're talking to Fluttershy, Fluttershy loves you. That sort of stuff. Then we've got favorite fan fictions. I'm on that panel. That's going to be us. That's going to be in 2 hours, and it's about just the favorite fan fictions that we get feedback from. Then we've got my horror panel, which is for if you want to improve your stories and make them deeper by using horror elements. I highly recommend you do that with every story you have. It's a great intermediate writing panel, or an intermediate seminar that I'm giving. After that, you've got Wanderer D with his Why Ponyfic Matters. He's given that one a few times before. It's a pretty good one. Somber is doing character creation, evolution, and development. Then we've got head-to-head canon, where we're going to talk about, all of us are going to talk about, various headcanon things. Character writing, and finally another one of these script writing, speed writing things. And then finally at the end of the day, we're going to do another reading critique thing, like we started with.